Next is the cancellation of the public hearing on Cornerstone. Thank you all for being here tonight. As you know, tonight was scheduled public hearing for Terwilliger and Bartone Properties, LLC, for a petition for inclusion of the property known as 14 St. James Place and municipal parking lot field number 8 at the southwest corner of St. James Place and Earl Avenue in the Arts and Culture Overlay District, in order to permit the construction of a 200-unit multi-dwelling. Over the course of the last few weeks, as the board has received and reviewed application material from the applicant, I communicated to the applicant that the application, as currently proposed, is not in keeping with the character of our downtown. We have communicated to the applicant that the contemplated project, as it currently exists, needs to be re-evaluated with regard to the number of aspects, specifically with regard to the height and the unit count. This decision by me and the board was based upon extensive review of the documents submitted and is in keeping with our responsibility to our residents as elected members of the board. Our decision was not based upon incomplete information and inaccurate statements that many have put forth throughout the community unanimously. Rest assured, I, along with the rest of the board, will put the best interests of this village and its residents first. Through counsel, the applicant was requested to withdraw his application to reevaluate the project in its entirety. The applicant has chosen not to. As a result, this board is procedurally left with no other option to reject the application in its current state and cancel the application without future date. This will afford the applicant an opportunity to reevaluate his application in light of the aforementioned concerns with regard to the size and scope of the proposed project, or withdraw the application at a future date. Is there a motion from the board to cancel the subject application without a future date? I need a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Mayor, could I just ask a couple of questions? I don't really quite understand exactly what's going on with this.
We're canceling the application. I made a motion. Did I have a second?
Second.
Okay, but
Good.
can we open the floor for discussion? Normally, you make a motion, and before the vote, you open the floor for discussion. I just have questions before I can't vote unless I can ask a few questions.
What's your question?
So, my question is the applicant pulling the application?
He canceled the application. It's canceled.
So he's pulling the application?
I canceled the application.
But, Mr. Mayor, is that the procedure legally, that the way it's handled? I'm just asking the question, I don't know.
I asked him to reevaluate it. He did not. I am pulling the application.
Is
So
that the
you said the
legal,
applicant didn't
is that the legal procedure, Ben? Perhaps you could just explain how because I was under the impression that, and again, I'm just asking the questions, just curious. I was under the impression that the application was submitted.
So the
application was submitted, the application was accepted by the village.
the application was submitted
And then the next step would have been to have a hearing.
to have a public hearing as it was scheduled. But
And then
based
after the hearing would be a vote.
Well, can I?
Well, let me just go through my process because,
No, I understand, but.
so after the
but
hearing would be a vote.
May I speak about the procedure
Okay.
in a narrative as opposed to being cross-examined? Allow me to speak.
Just
Mr.
was
Truncale,
asking
would you
questions.
please explain
Just
it?
asking questions.
So the usual procedure, as you so aptly stated, is that the applicant submits his application, and then there would be a public hearing. I was advised by the mayor that the board was inclined to have the applicant reevaluate the application based upon the size of the project as it was currently proposed. With that, I reached out to council and advised them that the board would like the applicant to withdraw his application based upon the fact that at this current time, the application as proposed with regard to size and scope was not what they perceived to be in keeping with the village's downtown. I spoke to council. Counsel, I believe, conveyed that message to his client. I was not a party to that conversation, as I would not expect to be based upon attorney-client privilege. And I was advised by counsel that the applicant did not wish to voluntarily withdraw the application. With that, the board, their option would be to cancel the application without a date and await either the applicant to take the information that he was given and, I guess, reevaluate the project and change the scope and size, or to present an entirely different project, or to have it out there indefinitely until he, tries to have the board look at this application again, either through a letter and asking them to reconsider the current application.
If I might.
Yes, please.
Up until now, we've been told, residents have been told that you couldn't ask questions until the hearing occurred. Correct?
Well, what the residents, I believe, have been told, and I was at a meeting on October 15th where I mentioned to the village and at the request of the board to explain the procedure and the process, which I just did. Now, there is case law out there that talks about a village board and their predisposition to an application. Okay, so you ask, okay, why does a board decide to cancel an application as opposed to opening the public hearing and having a public hearing and denying it maybe, or approving it? Because at that point, once the application is had, even if the board decides to deny the application, the applicant does have the avenue of challenging that denial and bringing what's known as an Article 78 proceeding, at which point, whether or not the board was inclined or disinclined to approve the application would be in the hands of a judge to then decide whether or not this board acted arbitrarily or capriciously in its determination. So what the board decided to do as opposed to that was to cancel the application without date. Now, when we talked about the procedure on the October 15th date that I was here, I explained to the public that when a board is predisposed before they have an application, a public hearing opened, there has been cases out there where the courts have reversed based upon the fact that they believe the board disqualified their ability to act in a way that was fair in order to weigh all the evidence before it. There are also other reasons with regard to not entertaining discussion with the public before a public hearing is opened. One of which is the fact that your comments are important. And your comments are important both to the board and to the applicant. How else can an applicant make decisions as to making changes that are necessary to make the project a better fit for the village? And also, how else can a board determine whether or not the project is a good fit for the village? So that's number one. And when you make those statements without the benefit of a public record, those statements are lost in the sense that they cannot be utilized or serve as the basis for any record by this board in any subsequent litigation. So what does that mean? When there's a record on appeal for an Article 78 proceeding, what you're allowed to put forth is the hearing transcript of the public hearing, the comments from the public, the responses from the board, the presentation by the applicant, every document that has been submitted as a part of the application, any document that was created with regard to that application by the village by way of its own experts. So those comments, in anticipation of a public hearing, cannot be utilized by a board to either approve and or deny an application. That's the first reason. The second reason is like I stated earlier, if an applicant believes that a board is predisposed one way or another, and the applicants are viewing this, I'm sure, tonight, anything that is said in a public forum that's not a part of the public record at a public hearing, they may utilize as an argument to say that there was a predisposition on the part of the board either one way or another, okay? And that's important to note because courts have in the past said that boards that deny an application solely upon public outcry, the judges have found, or courts have found, that that is arbitrary and capricious, and that is a standard that's utilized by a court.
So tonight, it would be inappropriate for people to speak out against this project or for people to speak in favor, I mean, where do we stand? I guess I'm confused.
Procedurally speaking, there is no application to discuss because the board,
So people are free to speak freely as opposed to in favor of it or against it?
well, it's still, when I say there's no public hearing yet, okay? But the
Right.
application has not been withdrawn
Right.
formally by the applicant.
I guess my question is, if people speak in favor or if people speak against, there's not going to be a legal jeopardy involved.
I didn't necessarily say that. I said, I didn't say that.
So if there's a legal jeopardy involved, there should be no conversation tonight, either pro or against.
I would, my legal recommendation would be there should be no pro or against, yes.
So what are we exactly voting on then? I'm not sure what I'm voting on.
I think you're voting on canceling the application
You
for
can't
this.
say I think. You're our legal counsel here. You have to tell us for sure. What are we voting on?
You're voting on canceling the application this evening,
Okay,
trustee,
so we're
yes.
voting on canceling
Without a future date.
the application. Is that even necessary? Is a vote to cancel the application even necessary? Is that part of the procedures of this?
Yes, because the hearing was noticed for this evening. So there was a public notice in the newspaper, and there were public mailings that were made by the applicant as part of our procedure. So technically, it was scheduled, well, not technically, it was scheduled for this evening.
Okay, so what we're voting on is we're voting on canceling the hearing for the Cornerstone.
Yes, you are.
Nothing more than that.
Nothing more than that.
Okay,
Without a future date,
without a future date.
yes.
But it could come up in a future point in time.
Well, it could if the applicant listens to the public and listens to this board and heard that the project as proposed was not a good fit and he decides to tweak it and resubmit something or tweaks the current application, then it could come back before this board, which is why I caution the board and the public against speaking out either in favor or against the application.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, I think I got a second.
Yes, you did.
Second, yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And based upon this calculation, there is no public hearing, such neither comments nor favor nor against will be responded to by this board.